Turn on. All right, 9. Just want to make sure. Hi, everybody. How are you doing tonight? My name is Becca Cotto, and for those that don't know me, I'm the Director of Racial and Social Justice for YWCA Delaware. I'm really excited about being here tonight with my wonderful women panelists. I always like when I've got these power hour. Tasmania, you're back again. I love it. I'm going to hire you. You're going to come volunteer for me. Actually, yeah, we'll talk later. She joined us last week and she was just great. So tonight with me, I have Melanie Ross Levin, who is, and I'm always get this wrong, I'm sorry, Melanie, is the Director of the Office of Women Advancement and Advocacy for the state of Delaware. And she does amazing work there. And after I introduce June, I'm going to have them give you a little blurb of what they actually do for a living. So next I have my colleague, the most wonderful June Crockett, who is at YW, the Delaware Workforce Readiness Program Coordinator, as well as the Entrepreneur and Career Readiness Program Coordinator. So she wears 2 hats officially, but probably about 5 more outside of that. So Melanie, if you wouldn't mind telling everybody a little bit about what your office does, because if you don't know, you don't know. And once you do, it's great to know that our governor supports a movement like this. And then June, same, let people know just a couple minutes about what you do at YW.
Sure. Thanks, Becca, for having me. So my office was started in 2017. We're a statewide office dedicated to women and girls. We are primarily focused around policy and research. So we advocate for women and girls in Legislative Hall in Dover. So that's where I mostly am during session. So it's great that this is not on a session night. That helps a lot. And so we advocate widely for bills that help women and girls. So anything from paid leave to minimum wage, to child marriage, to anything having to do with domestic violence, reproductive rights. So we cast a wide net because I like to say that anything that disproportionately impacts women and girls is a women's issue. So we cast a very wide net. And then we do research. For example, we did research on the impact of COVID-19 on Delaware women. We did research on domestic violence. We are working on a report now on women in trades. The shortcut of that is there's almost no women in trades in Delaware, which is very problematic because there tend to be high paying jobs, family sustaining wages. And we're also working on a report on Title IX. It's the 50th anniversary of Title IX. So we're working on that report as well. And so, and we do some select programming, not a ton of programming because we don't want to duplicate what's already happening at nonprofits across the state. So we do some select programming, including we have upcoming salary negotiation workshops, which I'll talk a little bit about later, that we offer to help address the wage gap. And we also run the Delaware Women's Hall of Fame. And so we do a lot with the Delaware Women's Hall of Fame and really promoting the visibility of women in our state, because it's hard to be what you can't see, which is a quote from the founder of the Delaware of the Children's Defense Fund, Marion Wright Edelman, who says you can't be what you can't see. And so we try to promote the great things that women are doing in the state by pushing and promoting the Delaware Women's Hall of Fame and work around that.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Can you guys hear me? I'm back.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, before I pass it off to June, and I don't know, Melanie, if you mentioned that one of the things your office does is organize all of the women involved organizations. We get together and they so graciously, we all share what our advocacy issues are, what's our priorities, from education through, she talked about minimum wage, family paid medical leave. And that's, I think, for me, one of the most important things is all of us out there doing this work, and Melanie's department pulled us together to say, hey, let's support each other while we're doing the same stuff. And I think it's been really effective in my opinion. So June, take it away.
Thank you, Becca. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is June Crockett. I'm the Workforce Readiness Program Coordinator for Women Achieving New Directions, otherwise known as WAND, at YWCA Delaware. And as Becca mentioned earlier, we have two tracks, Workforce Readiness and Entrepreneurship. I work on the Workforce Readiness side. So I run programs for women and their families to advance them economically. We have a focus on soft skills and a huge deep dive into transferable skills. There are so many women, not just women, but especially women who wear many, many hats, who do all kinds of things while taking care of their children and balancing the household and working outside of it. And sometimes we don't take a look within to realize that there's so many skills that we've already accomplished, and we don't know how to translate that into something transferable into their present career or a different career. So we are very proud of the programming that we have. We focus on one program called Workability, which is fantastic. And we're almost in our fifth cohort of YW Strive, which is a digital literacy kind of, I guess, hand in hand. We kind of gave it a big hug and wrapped it around all of our workforce readiness program. And it's something we've been very excited about and happy to provide.
Awesome. All right, so let's get started. Living wage. First, unfortunately, Charito couldn't join us tonight. But that's okay. So if these lovely ladies, and if we finish up early, we finish up early, and that's fine. Melanie, I know that you were involved quite a bit in Delaware's fight for minimum wage. And Delaware, for those that don't know, last year, legislative session, we passed minimum wage increase to $15, which won't actually be $15 till 2025. And that was a big fight. Tell me a little bit about some of the struggles in the advocacy space and what some of the opponents had to say, if you don't mind, if you can remember at this point.
Sure. I mean, whenever minimum wage is on the table, the arguments are usually the same, which is that minimum wage will paralyze businesses, will make businesses lay off employees. But those arguments are usually the same no matter when it's introduced. Like, doesn't matter the decade, doesn't matter, the arguments are the same. So the bill that passed was to basically slowly increase the minimum wage. So right now in 2022, it's $10.50, and then it will be $11.75 in 2023, $13.25 in 2024, and then $15 in 2025. The big difference, though, is this fight came before the huge levels of inflation that we're seeing. It also came before, the fight for talent has just skyrocketed. So even though this was a great accomplishment, a number of businesses have already surpassed these minimum wage markers in terms of what they have to offer to get employees in the door. So it was good that Delaware did it, of course, but the market has changed dramatically since when this bill passed, which is crazy because it passed in 2021. So things have just drastically shifted. And so what a family needs, the fight for 15 or the fight for a $15 minimum wage has been around for a while now. And the issue is that, by the time we get there, that number means less really, because it's not being indexed with inflation or indexed with the reality of costs that people have. There was also a bill that got some attention in 2021, which there was a temporary youth and training wage, which allowed employers to pay people under 18 and people in training for the first 90 days, 50 cents less than the minimum wage. So that was repealed in 2021. There has been some efforts to try to increase the tipped minimum wage in Delaware, which is what tipped workers get. I think what happens is when that type of bill is paired originally with the fight for the overall minimum wage, they end up getting separated out, and that one always gets pushed to the side. The problem is the tip minimum wage has been the same since 1996. It's $2.23 an hour. It disproportionately impacts women and people of color. It means that your wages are really inconsistent. There's many reasons why the tipped minimum wage is just bad, including that you're relying on tips, which aren't necessarily guaranteed, which, you know, brings in like sexual harassment and brings in all this sort of weird power dynamics. And so we know that tipped workers are one of the most unstable workers in terms of their wages. And it's definitely impacts, there's definitely a racial component to that. So white servers get paid more for the same level of service as Black servers and Hispanic servers. And so it's one of the things that Delaware unfortunately hasn't addressed. Even though we've gotten some headway on the minimum wage through these bills I mentioned, the tipped wage is still something that needs to be addressed. And so every year a bill gets brought up, but it just gets, there's always a huge fight around it. And so it's something that other states have addressed successfully, and we should be able to address.
Thank you for all that. Yeah, it's good to know what's going on in the movement. And, you know, I wanted to kind of establish minimum wage and where Delaware was in that. And I jokingly said to some of the advocates after the minimum wage passed is, you guys need to get started on $25 minimum wage like today. And that is prior to, you know, what we've had going on in the last year. And so now we need to have started that yesterday. But Melanie, you touched on a couple things that throughout the 21-day challenge, some of the things that people read were, we talked about the tipping wage, and we talked about the origination of that is definitely steeped in racism, because that was the original population of servers, where Black women usually, and that was actually in FDR's, they started that tipping or that serving wage at 25 cents. And even the union workers, the Black male union workers, managed to unionize and get paid, but domestic workers or any kind of servers or anything, that wasn't the case. And it looks like we're still there. And the majority of people in those professions are women. So here we are, still, what year is it? 2022, I think. So I'm gonna pull up, if you guys did the 21-day challenge, then you guys probably saw the living wage calculator. So I'm gonna pull it up, and I'm pulling Delaware, and June's gonna talk to it a little bit. June, you don't need to get deeply into the topics because we're going to dive a little bit into them.
Okay.
But if you don't mind, I guess I have to share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just for all intents purposes, we're gonna just do Newcastle because it would take us forever to do the others. So go ahead, June, and if you need me to move the slide or go, I can do that. So
Okay. Well, I find this calculator very interesting. It is a step up from the way previous data was compiled. The threshold before this one was the poverty level. This particular calculator goes, I guess, a little bit above, it does go a little bit above that, meaning it factors in a little bit more. So instead of the poverty level, it's based on geographical information, more specific factors that would impact those that live in particular areas, and what the basic need, that being food and things of that nature, to sustain oneself. But even in this model, there's a lot that's not being factored in. It's a lot. You could go to the, so, you know, even if we look at $16.56 for an individual with no children, we know, just because we've lived in the past several months, that, you know, we're experiencing something that I guess people didn't expect. And the cost of living is higher. Inflation is rampant. grocery store prices are shocking. And I don't think that we as a society is paying close enough attention to certain factors that we have no control over. So while I do believe that this particular calculator is a step up, I think it's a bare minimum and some more work needs to be done. If you scroll down a little bit back into the expenses part of it, here's a list to the left of some of the factors that they are basing some of their data on. Food, childcare, medical, and the list goes on. But some of these numbers to me still don't make sense. Women don't get paid as much as men. Black women get paid even less. So I don't know. I think that there's much more research that needs to be done. And we need to really pay attention to some more of the factors and maybe even factoring in or giving some buffer room for things like inflation, for things like, gas prices going crazy because of whatever reason or something that's happening overseas. There are things that I think we need to pay closer attention to. And it's been a struggle. In the work that I do for YW, I'm very passionate about working with area employers for job placement. And while we're not in the business of placing people into jobs, we certainly work with employers who know our programs and love our programs and understand that those who go through them have developed some skills that they want. And I've had to have several discussions with partnering with certain employers simply because I don't want to place someone in a job that means they'd have to work 2 of them and take care of their kids and then give most of that away to childcare to survive. So it's something that I'm very passionate about and trying to do the best that I can and trying to rally in whomever I can to get on board. I think employers need to do a little bit better. And I get it. I work with entrepreneurs. I know some of what the fear is. But at the same point, this market right now is not for employers, it's for employees. They have more options. COVID happened and a lot of people were deemed essential workers and had to come in or face losing their jobs. And they had to risk their health for $12.25 an hour. In what world does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Michelle, these are great questions. And when we get to the end here, we're going to talk about some of what possibly could be some of the solutions. So we looked at that chart of living wage, and I don't know if you guys noticed, it kind of included several categories, right? It had housing, it had food, it had healthcare, it had civics, and it had childcare. And so if we were just looking at a single person, I just like to do stuff on my calculator here. I didn't even go to someone with children. $65 a week for food. I'm not sure that anyone could eat right now on $65 a week. So that's kind of a little bit frightening because I think at least $10 a day, right? That's not even that. So yeah, so like a living wage is meant to be what you can live off of. That's what the term means, right? So it's those things, it's housing. And I know both of you kind of in this span. What do you guys think of housing right now? Do you think that the amount that the living wage gave here was, what was it? It was, okay, so, sorry, I'm just looking this up. So a single person, $10,800. And so that would be, generally speaking, 1-bedroom apartment. So that's $900.
Mm-hmm.
Is that anywhere? Is that feasible, guys?
No, that's absurd, in my opinion. And here's why. Perhaps there are a couple, maybe one in Newcastle County where people could live at around that price. I don't think it's as low as 900. It's possibly a bit more. But how much of that housing is around? Do people have options? How many people have options to live and pay that amount? And then if there's not enough to go around, what happens to the folks who can't, find housing in that price range? I don't think it's feasible.
Yeah, I do wonder right now with the demand, Melanie, are you guys getting like any kind of, what should we do about this? What should we do about this? Because women are probably, well, I shouldn't say probably, we know women are more affected by this because most often if they're not, if the mother and father are not together, then they usually have custody of the kids, not all the time. Tasmania said 1,200 to 2,200 per month due to low supply and high demand. So what, are you getting anything like, is there any proposals coming through or anything that you know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is that all these indexes, and there's several different sorts of basic economic indexes, are all lagging behind the latest huge inflation period, which was really in the last year. And so what we're seeing is a huge gap in what is realistic for people, like what we know on the ground is realistic for people. And that doesn't mean that one apartment complex is near public transportation or in the school district where the kids really need to stay in, or I mean, there's so many other factors. Or you even have the deposit and all of the financial requirements to get into that one apartment. And so I think there's a push. And of course, as an office, we push for it as much as possible because a lot of the social service programs are based on the federal poverty line, which is even worse than the living wage calculator in terms of what it calculates. It really only includes food. And so when you hear the poverty line numbers, they're even crazier in terms of what people, can really survive on. And so what we try to advocate for as an office is increasing the percentage of the poverty line for people to qualify for the various benefits. Because if the percentage is so low, either at 100% or even 150%, there are a few states that have raised it, to 200% or even higher than that, which is still very low, but you're leaving out a ton of the working poor when the percentage of poverty is so low. People fall through the hole. They're working, but they don't qualify for, childcare subsidy or enough food stamps or other benefits. I think there's also an effort to have money associated with the recent recovery efforts to go towards affordable housing, because housing is just what we know is if housing isn't stable, everything else falls apart. Health falls apart, education falls apart, family stability falls apart. Like if I had to pick one thing, housing is the most important thing. And that is well researched. So if families don't have affordable housing, everything else goes to the wayside. And so there is efforts to have an increase in affordable housing stock, and to define that in realistic terms, because it is hovering on a crisis. I mean, people can't necessarily afford, even if they want to get out of renting, the market is so Looney Tunes right now, they can't afford to bid on anything, even if they're in the position to do that, which is very difficult to do. And so, it becomes very difficult for women who are more likely to be caregivers of both children and their parents. So they're kind of in a triple-decker sandwich of caregiving. And so it is very scary, frankly, right now, with the increased costs, because I don't think all of the benefits programs and social services programs are necessarily adjusting to the drastic increase in food costs or the drastic increase in housing costs or transportation or gas or childcare. I mean, I think there hasn't, all of those programs don't adjust as quickly as they need to. And that's a big concern we have as an office.
Yeah, most definitely. I actually have a friend, a couple, they just had a baby, well, they had a baby last year. And he told me that the cost of daycare per month is $1,500.
The
Just sit
mortgage
for a
payment.
second, just sit for a second. $1,500. Like
Yeah,
we
I
just
paid
talked about.
$1,500 in DC in 2010.
Yeah.
And I thought that the cost here was so much better than what I paid in DC, because now that cost is more like 2,200, 2,300, but I
Right.
paid 1,500 in 2010. And you feel like we actually spaced out our kids because we couldn't afford childcare at the same time. So our kids are 4.5 years apart on purpose. And for 6 months, we had to pay for 2 kids for childcare. We were paying over $3,000 a month for 6 months, and it almost broke us. And I have a 2-parent household, both employed, have good support, and it's just very, very difficult. I think one big difference that DC had that Delaware largely doesn't have is free pre-K. So at the time, DC was rolling out pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. So families, at least if they could get to pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, they at least had some relief by getting some of those hours paid for, not all the hours, but some of the hours. But yeah, there was 6 months where it was just crazy. I was paying more for childcare than my mortgage.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly my point. Go ahead, June.
There just seems to be a disconnect. Employers want good workers. In order to have good workers, if they have children, they have to be able to afford housing and daycare. And somehow I really just feel like this all goes hand in hand. And I don't understand, and maybe Melanie, you can enlighten me, or Rebecca chime in. I just feel like there should be more of a connection or a kind of working together or something that makes sense. It's just so, you literally have to make a choice. Am I going to pay for childcare so that I can go to work just to pay for childcare? Why is that? For that to be a reality in 2022 is just, we got to do better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the countries that have the least, the countries that have the most women in the workforce and have the lowest wage gap are countries mostly in Scandinavia, and parts of Western Europe, where they have very highly subsidized childcare. They have supports for women who are doing caregiving, and a large part of the wage gap has to do with caregiving. Delaware will not survive if babies are not born. So we have to have an environment where it's friendly for babies to be born. And the cost of that is so astronomically high that a lot of people are choosing not to have kids or to have fewer kids. And that results in an imbalance in terms of our society. And so I think the best we can do is try to support programs and policies that help make that transition easier for working families, because women do calculate, and they say, well, I have 2 kids in childcare, I'm not making enough money. Like, if the minimum wage is so low that they're not making enough money, a lot of women do say, well, then I'm going to leave the workforce. And we know that that's devastating for women in terms of the long term, in terms of their retirement security and their economic stability. But I don't blame women for doing that, because that's the reality of having kids in America, unfortunately. But we also know that, like, right now, it's really hard to get any employees, period, because of the economic forces. And so it's actually a time where some of these issues can get pushed even further. Like, I think it's a great time for my stuff. My stuff, like, I'm always kind of pushed to the side, like, oh, that's nice, Melanie, that's extra things. But now, if employers don't think about this, they cannot recruit employees.
Right.
Like, if they don't think about flexibility, they don't think about supporting women in the workforce, that's 50% of their applicants or more, depending on the job. And so for me, it's a great time to be pushing these things, because employers are more likely to pay attention, because they cannot recruit. If they're losing employees and it's forcing overtime, it's costing them more money. And so for me right now, it's kind of a great time to be pushing these things. And I don't think all of these dynamics are bad necessarily. I think employees are in a better situation than they ever have to be pushing these issues. And it's just the sort of the recruitment dynamic of what's happening with jobs. It's pushing wages higher. It's pushing flexibility more so than it ever has been. And I think COVID kind of shined a light on caregiving and women. And I think that has helped push employers, because it's not a nice to do, it's more of a have to do, which I appreciate. So I even though it's a little bit of a scary time in terms of all these things for pushing worker rights and for pushing worker issues, I think it's a good time, actually.
Right. It's almost essential. This actually threw me back to just thinking about this talking is, I remember when, and I was super young, I was fresh out of high school, but MBNA was the place to be. And one of the things MBNA had on site was a huge daycare. And imagine that, and that was the idea of an employer, right? Like you can go to work, you can drop your kid off, you can go visit your kid at lunch, you can pick your kid up right after work. And in the meantime, you're getting paid a good wage and so I'm hoping that employers will go that way, because if you want to become competitive, you have to have the flexibility of working from home. You have to have the flexibility of being able to even maybe access childcare for your employees. Like I think I think people were vying left and right to work there they had like one of the best daycares in Delaware. I remember that. I'm going to share real quick because I think Michelle makes a hugely valid point here. She says there's also a huge impact on grandparents who are raising grandchildren who may have a variety of special needs, often due to the opioid epidemic. And then there's also caring for aging parents while trying to navigate treatment and resources for their absent adult children. Yeah, so this creates a whole subclass of women struggling to make this work, right? Yeah, there's and Michelle, I don't know if you're talking about 4 generations and there are 3, but definitely my generation is what they call the middle of the sandwich generation. So I'm in my 40s, and so it's time to take care of your parents, but your kids aren't necessarily gone yet, and so you're trying to manage work-life balance, and you can't really manage either of those because then you have this whole other extracurricular thing, like raising kids and taking care of your parents. It's I think it's just a lot on a woman's plate now.
And I think that the biggest issue, and this happened during COVID, is that a lot of women who weren't going to necessarily retired early to take care of grandkids. And now they find themselves out of the workforce. They're trying to think about getting back in the workforce. And it's very dangerous for women to retire early because they're much more likely to outlive men. I don't know if anyone's been at a nursing home lately, but there's almost no men in nursing homes. And because they're drastically outliving men, and that cuts across all races, by the way, they have ongoing they have like a longer kind of process of medical issues and needs. And so the caregiving becomes very challenging when you pair that with retirement savings or lack of retirement savings. Right. I think women are the first to step up, whether it's for their kids or their parents or other relatives, but then they become in a big pickle when they're retiring. They're trying to retire, and sometimes it's not an option. Like my parents joke all the time, "Oh, we're going to work forever." I'm like, well, that's not a plan. Thanks. That's not a plan. Like you need to have a plan. You need to save for retirement, because sometimes it's not your option. Like sometimes it's not your option. You have a medical reason or other reason where you can't work. Right. And so,
or your spouse needs the care.
Or yes, it becomes very scary. And what we saw in Delaware was a huge amount of women, both younger women and older women, leaving the workforce during COVID to take care of kids or family members. And so it's really scary. Like if women don't go back into the workforce, sort of the long-term economic instability that's going to be caused due to this COVID period. So that, I think that speaks to this particular issue.
Yeah.
It
Jude,
does.
did
I
you,
think I
go
wanted
ahead.
to say, because Melanie brought up a good point. We've been talking about a living wage, and in the conversation recently that Melanie brought up, retirement.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
what we
a
were
lot
just
of
gonna go, but
people,
go ahead. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's not an option. It's not a viable option for a large percentage of our population. Those who are not making a living wage can't, with what are they saving? I mean, there's so much work to be done. You have employers who, maybe they do pay a decent wage, but they don't offer a 401k. So, you have a population who has access to investments and investing that others do not. It's not an equitable uh, plan here. It's just not. And, I hear people all the time who can't even fathom retiring because they never had an opportunity to save properly because of the amount of money they make. And, I'm not even talking about uneducated people. I'm talking about people with master's degrees, sometimes 2 master's degrees, and most of the time it's a woman I'm having this conversation with because they may be doing, something they love, and it pays okay. Their male counterpart is getting, way more than what they're getting. It's not, everyone doesn't have the access to make a plan that's viable for their future,
Right.
which is something else that needs to be addressed.
Right. We're gonna see, I think, a large population. We know that you can't even live on Social Security, right, by itself now. And so that is going to bring us just a little bit, because I think June added that level in it. So we're kind of talking about living wage, but there's also something called, where did I put that? Yeah, there we go. Basic economic security tables. And Melanie, you can just kind of talk about what's in that a little bit. It's kind of, it's just kind of a living wage in addition. So
the basic economic security table, I think, is kind of like living wage plus, because it includes parts of what the living wage calculator includes, which are things like housing, food, transportation, and childcare. But it also includes what people realistically should be saving in terms of emergencies and retirement. So the issue is that we have the poverty line, which is like very, very low, which only includes food, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you can eat but not be housed. You can eat but not have health care. So it seems very odd, which is why the poverty line is oh so low. Then there's the living wage calculator, which is a bit better because it includes, the housing, transportation, food, and childcare, but it doesn't include any savings at all, which is a bit unrealistic as well, because emergencies happen all the time, and emergencies happen to people of all economic incomes, and even more so, I think, for low income people. And so the basic, it's called the BEST index, which I think is clever. So basic economic security tables index really is more of an economic well-being index, and I think is much more realistic. It got a lot of attention when it came out, and it's very different than the poverty line. So for example, in 2017, which is the latest data I have for some of these issues, it says that the federal poverty line for someone under 65 in Delaware was almost $13,000, 12,700, but the best index was $35,000, which makes a lot of sense. Like, think about living on $12,000 in Delaware and like being housed and having all of those things met. 35 is still a stretch, but I think 35 is much more realistic. So I just think it's a much better index for people, because all of our social programs are based on the federal poverty line, which then, means that you only qualify if you're a percentage of federal poverty, which is so low and very unrealistic, and doesn't necessarily reflect all the inflation changes of recent. And so, to me, it makes a lot more sense. The idea that we're having this index that includes some retirement savings makes sense. some emergency savings makes sense. It includes some asset development, a minimal level of asset development to actually make it, to really make it, not just barely feed yourself, which is what the poverty line is. And I think it's just a better standard. And I wish more of our programs were based on the best index versus the poverty line.
Right. Right. Wouldn't it be amazing if that literally was how things were, instead of, if you go above the poverty line, you don't get these benefits, which is, that whole thing is insane to me, because it's like, we've heard the term corporate welfare, and, you think you make minimum wage and you work at Walmart, work 40 hours a week, and you still qualify for Medicaid, right? You still qualify, not Medicaid, Medicare. Yeah, Medicaid. I do it all the time. And then you still qualify for food assistance. And so if we can't look at that picture as a country and go, there's a lot wrong with this. There's a lot wrong with this, and move more towards the best, right? I think about the ability of saving for retirement, and we haven't concentrated on it. We've done it, but to sit down and actually look at it, I don't even know. I know people do better than we do, but I've always had the opportunity to work, other than when I had my own business, to work for an organization that had some type of retirement, right? And
well, there's actually, Becca, there's a bill right now called the EARNS Act.
Yes.
And that is a bill that my office has supported. I believe the YW has supported, which would basically allow for people who work at places that don't offer 401ks to be able to pay into a 401k that's run by the state. Mm-hmm. And so it would allow for easy access to at least be able to save for retirement. Now, what it doesn't address is the fact if people can't afford to put any money into that fund.
Right.
But we know if it's easier for workers to do it, they're more likely to do it, even if it's at very low levels.
Right.
And so it's just an important part of making it a routine of saving, even if it's a very little bit amount, to save every paycheck. And so this would make it easier for largely women who work at these jobs to be able to at least have an option for saving for retirement. And so I think it's a good bill. It's something that other states have done. And they're trying to fill the holes where employers aren't offering it, maybe because they're a small business or it's a hospitality industry type of position. And so it's something that I think would be helpful for largely women employees.
Yeah. It's definitely would be helpful for small businesses, because, I think we opened a Roth IRA or something for when I had my own organization, but it's still not the same as, 401k and the benefits that you get from that. My next thing I was going to talk about, and June, I'm going to go to you for this one. And we'll come back to Melanie, because I know she has a lot to say about this, but the pay equity gap. Right. So let's talk about this, because YW concentrates on women, but I know that we also do some help, especially comes to entrepreneur with men. But what do you just talk to me about this? I'm not even going to ask you questions. Tell me about, do you have examples of situations where perhaps someone's even started a business and they've gotten, a loan or a home equity loan or, something like that?
Well, so as of late, the past several months, I've been focused more on the workforce readiness side as we, brought in someone to concentrate on entrepreneurship for the program. But yes, since I've been doing the work that we do, there is always a pay equity gap. It's constantly brought up. We talk about it all the time. It's an exhausting topic because everybody knows that if you're a woman of color doing a job that a white male is doing, most likely you're not getting paid the same amount of money. And, how do you, this comes up a lot because we talk about and teach, how to advocate for yourself, how to ask for more money in your position at your job, if you're trying to make some upward movement within the same career, or even with the same employer, you have to have these conversations. And, historically women shy away from those types of conversations. I think there's some improvement that's being made there. But if you can muster up the confidence and courage to have these hard or challenging conversations, and your employer just sees you as someone who, because of your gender, can only make X amount of dollars, what are we doing about that? Like, where do we go? Do we, it's such a institutionalized, deceiving wrong that needs to be right, like right now. I don't understand why we can't just pay everybody the same. If X person is qualified, has the same educational background, demonstrated similar skills, I can see maybe a difference a little bit based on experience. But if it's that similar, how is there a $20,000 difference in annual salary? It's infuriating.
Yeah,
Becky,
I think,
Yeah, go ahead, Melanie.
I mean, I think what I'm seeing lately is a lot of efforts around salary transparency, which I've been talking about for a decade and a half now. Salary transparency will help primarily women and people of color with the wage gap. The issue right now is a lot of people don't know how their wage compares to their colleagues' wage. And so one of the things that I've always said is that the best thing that male allies can do is tell us how much they're getting paid.
Mhm.
Like, the idea that that's not proper to talk about salary, that it's not proper to talk about wages, only helps perpetuate the wage gap. The thing that has helped me the most in terms of negotiating my own salary was that I would talk not only to my colleagues about how much they were getting paid, but I would talk to people who work at other organizations when I was looking for jobs. And that trust and that sort of camaraderie is so important. Now, if we leave it up to individuals to make that decision, we'll never really make headway. And so there is an effort to make salaries transparent, and particularly make the range of salaries transparent, which I also think, frankly, is better for the applicant and the employer. I mean, how many of us have applied for jobs, we get to the very end and what they're offering is abysmal, and we would never ever apply if we knew how much they were offering. So it's just a giant waste of time.
Yeah.
So the effort of salary transparency, especially within the band, lets you know where the heck you fall within the band.
Right.
I mean, I work for the state now, so my wage is literally on the website, which I actually think is a positive thing. I think it's a very positive thing. It shines a light. It means that I can go and find out how much my colleagues are getting paid. And it makes employers be more conscious when they're offering salary, that they do a real calculation based on experience and everything. Because when you shine a light on wages, all of a sudden they are more careful. If you don't shine a light on wages, that's when you see more disparity. The other thing I would say, in addition to those types of bills that would be helpful, is that the wage gap is very complex, and we know that. And the bill that we just passed last week, the paid family medical leave bill, is going to help primarily women and caregivers, who are mostly women, get paid, get actual money, and not have it be unpaid. FMLA is unpaid. And so there's lots of sort of different ways to address the wage gap. It's not a one size or one, kind of solution. But I think these salary transparency bills can be helpful. I think, we know union workers are more likely to have less of a wage gap. There's still a little gap, but it's a lot less. We know that, addressing caregiving, helping families pay for childcare, these are all things that help lessen the wage gap. And then if you work for an individual employer, I think it's looking really carefully at sort of your hiring and promotional practices, making sure you're keeping data, not just on gender, but race and gender. So you're not looking at just men and women, but you're looking at how your company pays Black women, Hispanic women, Asian women, etc., white women. And when you look at those intersections of race and gender, you're more likely to see a pattern of problems. So, you know, are you only promoting white women? Are you only disciplining Black women, for example? So if you keep data that's detailed, I like to say that people keep data on what they care about. So if you actually care about how your employees are being treated, you should be keeping data as an employer at the intersections of race and gender. And I think if to the extent that you have data on disability, LGBTQ status, all of those intersections are important. But what we're doing at the state is just looking more closely at those intersections. I'm looking at them within each agency. Also looking at, you know, things like training, policies, making sure that we have clear policies and procedures, and making sure that we're supporting caregivers. That's when women really get hurt the most in terms of a wage gap. It's when, you know, they feel, for good reason, because they're not well supported in the United States, that they, you know, it might be a time to step back. It might be a time to not ask for what, you know, they deserve. We are offering salary negotiation workshops, which I put in the chat. That's just one small piece. I don't want to pretend like we're putting it all on the employee. That's one small piece. And then the last thing I would say is that in this current economy, I would say if you can, don't be afraid to job hop. Don't be afraid to, you know, to put yourself out there. I think some women, including myself, I was at my same employer for 11 years. We know that if you're an employer for a really long time, it's much harder to kind of have those bigger jumps in salary. So right now is not a bad time to think about those things in order to get the wage that you deserve.
Yeah, you're definitely you definitely, I think, hit the nail on the head there with it's an employee market right now, and I'm not telling everyone to go find a job, but I also think, just me personally, I'm an extremely loyal person, and so when I work somewhere, I know June is like this too. We both contribute to the spirit of YW and who we are, and we become a bit of a family, you know, and you know, that's I think I prioritize my work atmosphere almost more than money. And so that's one of the things sometimes you give up. I will say what's really funny is my husband and I met, we had the same job at the time. We were both retail managers. And I had been with the company since I was 16 years old. And he came when he was, I don't know, 21, 22. But when we started dating, he was making a decent amount more than me. And by no means was he more talented than I was. So I'm just saying, I mean, I had been there since. So, but it was funny because why would we ever know that? Right. Except for the fact that we started living together and paying bills together. And I was like, wait a minute. Like I don't even know what I didn't even know what to say. But that's what happens. And I think you're right, Melanie. I think talking to that point, and the salary workshops are a really good idea, especially I think what it teaches you to do is have the confidence to have the skills to back up what your ask is. I have taken those. So if you guys are interested in taking those, Melanie put the link in there. But also, we're going to wrap up in a little bit, but I would love even for our participants to join in this. And what are some, because I think Michelle asked earlier, what are some solutions? I know we've talked about some, we've talked about obviously salary transparency, but what are also some solutions, not just to the page gap, but to living wage? And I think some of those things we have to address. You know, we didn't even talk about healthcare, right? We didn't even like bring that one up, which is a whole different, June and I had a conversation about that earlier, is just because you can afford a Lexus, or just because you can buy a Lexus doesn't mean you can afford a Lexus, right? So like, just because you can get healthcare doesn't mean you can afford healthcare. So I would love to have everybody, you know, if they had any thoughts or any experiences, you know, feel free, if you want to raise your hand, you can come off and offer some suggestions. But I just would love to kind of brainstorm is how do we get around that living wage? And I guess part of it is when the argument comes up as to, you know, June has this often when employers say to her, you know, I can't get people to come work. What was it you said to me?
I said a lot, but basically, we're in an environment right now, COVID shined a light on this, where employees have some options. And you can't expect someone to work for you if you're paying them $12.25 or $12.50, not offering health insurance, not offering paid time off. Why would anybody do that when there's more options out there now? So employers are complaining about not having job candidates. It used to be not having qualified job candidates. Now they're people are coming in for an interview. They may come in for the second interview, but by the time the third interview rolls around, they have another option. So until employers understand that they have to pay more and offer more benefits, they're not going to be in a winning situation. I think some employers are just holding out until this phase passes and they have the upper hand again. It's unfortunate that so much of what's the right thing to do is in their court. And unless they are so inclined to do something about it, it's going to be a hard push up a hill. I try to make partnerships with area employers who are providing a living wage at least, and if not, they're offering some educational benefits or something else that would provide economic upward mobility. Otherwise, I just feel like employers are going to have to really, look within and see that right now they have to make some changes if they want employees to, stick it out with them. I heard you say, Becca, earlier about, how we're both kind of loyal to YW and what we do. I think part of it is because we love it. But also, and it's, it's very fulfilling. I could do this all day, every day. But if you work for an employer who doesn't value you and you see it day in and day out, why should they stick with you?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that I think organizations are going to have to start reevaluating. It's funny because people often say, like, we can't get anyone to work. People aren't working. Yeah, exactly. Wrong is right. Society, employers want a person. Right. We talk about, employers talk about they can't get people to work. I don't know anyone unemployed. I will say that. And Melanie touched on this a little bit earlier, which is funny because I don't think people are taking into account how many early retirees who weren't planning to leave the workforce for 3 to 5 to 6 years. And and are they able to go back and does someone want to hire? I mean, honestly, if you're offering health insurance and you have someone come in and apply and they're 65 years old, you already know that your health insurance is going to cover, it's going to output more for them, right? And so while no one's going to say that or because it's illegal, it's still a factor. It's a factor in anything. Healthcare is a huge cost. It's a huge cost for individuals and employees. And that's a whole, we can have a whole nother Let's Talk series just on healthcare. But actually we're having women's health. That's the fourth one this month. Stay tuned for that. We have some great speakers there too. So I think, like I said, we lost one of our participants tonight, so we're not going to stay too much longer. Tasmania, thank you for participating, and Michelle too. Michelle, did we talk about any of your other questions? Hold on, because you had one in the beginning. I think we touched on.
There was one I was going to try to answer, which was Michelle asked about what structural mechanisms, regulations could encourage employers to pay a living wage. So that's pretty difficult. I mean, I think the things that I have seen have been obviously increasing the minimum wage, increasing the tipped minimum wage, strengthening protections for unions, strengthening protections around discrimination, making it like really, if someone is found that they are discriminating against, if they're doing wage theft, that it really hurts them in the pocketbook. Right now, it hurts them very minimally. So there's a pretty low risk to engage in wage theft, to engage in discrimination. And so there are other states that make it more problematic for companies that do that. I think helping around the cost of childcare, pre-K, all of those things won't directly deal with what Michelle was mentioning, but it will at least make it possible for women who are debating to go back to work. And I think increasing the poverty rate in terms of when you qualify for the different benefits would also help women. But the free market is, what's funny now is we're in this really odd stage where like the free market has flipped and employees have more of a say right now than employers. And now the employers, we saw that in some other states where nurses were all of a sudden, being told that they couldn't, get paid higher wages in some states. So it's interesting. There's the free market argument when I think it benefits the companies, and then all of a sudden now it's like, wait, just kidding. I don't want the free market because women are actually making a living as nurses. So there was some legislation, not in Delaware, but in other states. This is my little one. This is my attempt to work-life balance here. There's been a pushback around some states that have, because nurses are in high demand. So all of a sudden the free market is dictating a much higher wage, and all of a sudden people are freaking out. So that's been interesting to see. We haven't had that in Delaware as much, but.
No, I think it's coming now. I think it's coming. I think, especially I think I saw, and I know this is silly, I'm just going to end on something silly. I saw TikTok and it talked about it basically had someone sitting at a desk and the phone was ringing, and it was a baby boomer first. And they're like, oh, Mary Ellen's calling me. Hey, Mary Ellen, how are you? And then it went down to like my generation, Gen X. And it was like, oh God, Mary Ellen's calling me. It's like, Mary Ellen, what's up? Right. And then it goes down to millennials and they're like, Mary Ellen, what do you want? And then it goes down to Gen Zs, and there was no one there to even answer the phone. So I was just laughing, is like, as the generations go on, they demand different things, different types of flexibility. And Tasmania is right. We absolutely have to, Delawareans are complacent. You're right. We need to demand what we want. And we're becoming a retirement state, which, I'm not sure how many people pay attention to that, but we are. So we really need to get it together when it comes for these supports for young families. So thank you guys so much. June, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Melanie. And I'll give you guys a couple minutes if you want to close out. And thank you for all our participants tonight. Next week, I think we are, what are we doing next week? Next week, we're doing bias and racism in film and media and even theater. We're having someone from the Delaware Shakespeare organization come and talk to us too. So join us. But June, if you want to say goodnight and then pass it off to Melanie.
Sure. I just want to thank everyone for attending and listening. Michelle, you asked a lot of questions. Thank you. Tasmania, thank you. It was nice to see you again. Melanie, I learned a lot from a lot of your comments. So thank you for enlightening me. And, I feel that we should all recognize some of the things that we've been discussing tonight and kind of do our homework, find out where and how you can make a difference and be diligent and passionate about it. That's the only way we're going to see some real change. And with that, I'll just say thank you for having me.
And just that, because of COVID, for legislation purposes, it was, it's easier. Thank you, Sarah. It's easier now more than ever to actually weigh in on legislation. You can do so virtually. You don't have to drive to Dover anymore. Soraya, you got to go over here if you're going to do that. And so I would just encourage people to, engage with their legislators, say thank you when they're doing the right thing, make sure they know when they're not supporting the issues that you care about. And then I would just say, as in terms of employees, just vote with your feet, really take this opportunity in this market to get paid what you're worth. to prepare to get paid what you're worth, and to work at companies that value you. And so I think that that's very important. And I think women should know that now is the time more than ever to do that.
Thank you all. Have a good night. Go forth, drive safely if you're out and about. It's crazy out there, although I think it just stopped. So night all.